Yes, looks great.
Okay, so this is the second chapter in our orthogonal or orthographic projection seminar. The first one we did shadows on a small arched niche or an edicula. Today we're going to be drawing a Palladian window as a small facade study and of course a plan. There's two graphic techniques and two things we're going to be looking at today is we're going to be drawing the Palladian window using the golden section, which of course you start with a square, and also some of the tools that I emailed last night were optional. You can use color if you want. You can either use your compass to draw the golden section. I can show you a different technique using your scale or a little cheat sheet to draw this. Then we're going to be looking at, we're going to be drawing the pilasters in between each one of the window jambs as kind of a Doric pilaster. Just remember that the ionic order we're going to be using, let me go back for a minute. The window jambs in between this, you're going to be drawing these as flat pilasters, not tapering columns. So we're going to be drawing the Doric order. Of course, it's 8 diameters tall, but I'll get into that in just a minute. So the image is, of course, a Palladian window, and I like to show, if you guys use at Photoshop, you can invert your original drawings and make them look like original blueprints. If you use Photoshop, you can just invert the image, Control, and then the plus sign, and it will make the image like an X-ray. But today we're just going to be using graphite, either an HB or 2B lead. You can freehand this. You can use your adjustable triangle. You can use some tools, but for the most part, we're just going to be loosely kind of freehanding this window. Of course, it is the Palladian window, really kind of originated by Palladian's architectural language. Here's Basilica Vicenza. You can clearly see that the Palladian window is a large arch in the center and two side lights on the left and the right side. This is the facade of Santa Maria San Ignace. You can see the Palladian window is used in classical and Baroque architecture, and the same thing as Mount Vernon. So the Palladian window clearly has an arched portal at the center, and of course the side lights on the left and the right. So what you can do is you can, hopefully you can see my drawing table. I'm just going to give you some quick examples. So Valerie, can you see the drawing table?
Yes.
I just want to make sure that you can see the bottom, of course, and see the bottom and then the top. So hold on, let me get a different.
It's a little bit off the screen.
Okay.
But the bottom's good.
Okay, hold on just a second. Because you can do this exercise on an 8.5 by 11 sheet in your sketchbook or an individual sheet. But the first thing to do is we're going to start drawing the elevation first. We're going to be just drawing the graphic technique. We're going to be drawing the golden section first. Then we'll be drawing the plan first. So roughly in the center of the sheet, you can do this with an HB, or probably an HB is better than the 2B is very soft. So let's kind of draw the golden section. We'll start with the square, which is, the square is going to be drawn 3 inches by 3 inches. So I would just roughly about the left side of this, draw the square. Is this clear enough, Valerie?
It's good on my end.
Okay, great. Okay, so we can just, with our scale, measure 3 inches, a 3-inch square. And this can just be your preliminary layout. This doesn't have to be the actual final drawing. I'm just going to give you kind of a refresher of how to draw the golden section. Okay, so we start with a square. Now remember, the golden section square is derived from the actual center. So what you're going to be doing is dividing 3 into the center. I just like to mark the center. You can use different colors for clarity. Then, of course, the diagonal from the midpoint to the edge, of course, the compass will draw the size of the rectangle for you. So in other words, what you can do is use either a scale or a little separate piece of paper just to make some tick marks if you don't have a compass. Then from the midpoint, you're just going to make sure the edge of that little tick mark draws the actual golden section proportion for you. So then, of course, the diagonal will show that this is actually a golden section rectangle. So let's see if we can draw that first. It should be relatively simple. Then, of course, if you want to, if you don't have a compass, you can use your scale to measure. That's roughly 3 3/8 or almost a half. Then take the scale and we'll just kind of transverse this edge out to the corner. You can draw a lot of these facades and elements without measuring a lot of increments. You can use geometry to kind of determine some things for you. So this will roughly be drawn at about the center of the sheet. Because at the bottom we're going to be drawing the plan. Later, of course, we're going to be casting shadows. Okay, so to equally figure out how to start drawing the side lights in the center of the window, you're just going to take this width, project it down onto the ground. Then you can divide this into 4 equal increments. So you can graphically do this. You can find the center of the rectangle. You can just draw diagonals from one corner to another. So obviously this is the center. Then you can easily divide the midpoint of that point in half. If you don't want to measure that, you can simply fold the sheet like this. And of course, the tick mark will show the center, or of course you can graphically draw another rectangle to mark the center, or you can do math to divide. I think this is roughly approximately 5 inches divided by 4, or you can just project the center points down. Okay, so given that when you start drawing the centers, you have the edges of course, the openings. And if anyone's confused, you can unmute and I can go back a couple of steps. Then again, you're just going to project the center marks down into the plan. So let's draw the thickness of the Palladian arch 1/2 of an inch. Okay, is anyone lost so far? Again, this is the preliminary layout. This is to get you to figure out how to properly draw the width of the Palladian window and of course how to center each 4 equal quadrants of quarter, quarter, and then a quarter. Okay, so that's just to get you familiar with reminding yourself how to draw the golden section, how to divide these things equally. So what you can do is you can use this sheet, or you can overlay another sheet. And what you can do is you can just measure these dimensions. That's 3 inches roughly by 5. Okay, well that makes sense because, the golden section does involve the Fibonacci spiral drawn with 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, so on and so forth. I'm just going to take a different sheet out and just draw these dimensions 3 by 5, and of course the floor plan divided into 4 sections. So again, roughly about the center of the sheet, you're going to draw the elevation again. Roughly 3 by 5. And if I'm going too fast, please let me know. Then of course I'm just going to draw the floor plan again with the increments measured. So I would suggest starting another sheet so that way you're not getting confused with all the different layers of the construction drawing. So, okay, so with each of the 4 quadrants established, let's try to draw the window jambs as these Doric plaster columns. Now the pilasters, if you look at the image on the PowerPoint screen, are not tapering. There are conditions where the plating window does use the rounded columns, but for this class, we're just going to be doing the non-tapering pilasters. And again, if I'm going too fast, just please let me know. Okay, so hopefully everyone is kind of on the same page. Okay, so next we're going to be drawing the actual pilasters. So these are really 3/8 of an inch in diameter. And how do you actually draw the thicknesses? Where do you start from? Okay, so let's go back to our just graphic layouts. We're just going to measure 3/8 of an inch from the end. Then, of course, from each edge, draw inside the edge. 3/8 of an inch. 3/8, and then, of course, 3/8. So in other words, this will make the opening for the actual side lights. Of course, the large central bayway has the arch. So again, 3/8 of an inch from the inside. Okay, so let's project that down into the floor plan. So then later we can start drawing the shadows. You can either measure these on your scale, 3/8 of an inch, or you can just project those down. that. With our darker lead, I just would darken in the plan profile, which is this. Okay, so if you go back to our ancient lessons of geometry, you know, really this is a golden section rectangle. So the proportion of that is roughly 1 by 1.618. So in other words, the length is a little bit more than 1.5, just for math and graphic purposes. Okay, let's go back to my PowerPoint image for just a second. You should be able to see the 3 fundamental orders before the Renaissance. We're going to be drawing what's called the Doric order as a flat pilaster. And by that, I mean is that the Doric column is 8 diameters tall. Then, of course, the entablature is 2 diameters. So let me move the sketch I just did for a second and let me draw that for just a minute. Well, I'll just leave this up for a minute. So in other words, on the right side of your sheet, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be drawing 8 diameters of course, the pilaster. How would you do that? You know, 3/8 times 8 diameters tall is, of course, 3/8 of an inch. So we're just going to draw 3/8 of an inch. We're just going to subdivide. You're just going to be drawing the squares. So it should come out to 8 equal segments. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Sorry, hold on. Yes, there are 8 columns. So in other words, to proportion the proper height of the entablature and the cornice, you're going to be using the diameter of the column like we've looked at in some of the earlier classes. So hopefully you can see on the PowerPoint presentation board is that the Doric order encompasses 2 diameters. So in other words, let's do 2 diameters. That's, you know, 3/4 of an inch, of course. So then to draw the proper entablature, or the frieze, of course, which is the architrave, the frieze and the cornice is roughly 3/4, well, actually exactly 3/4 of an inch. So you can measure 3/4 of an inch and continue that up. So this will give you the proper height of course, the Doric entablature, which of course is seen in this sketch. So then we're just going to kind of roughly draw from observation where the architrave starts, where the cornice ends. There is a mathematical, geometrical way to calculate this, but it would take you several hours to draw this and properly proportion. We're just simply going to draw this by observation. So I usually just take the height and divide that into thirds. The first third is, of course, the line for the entablature. Then, of course, the second one is the actual cornice. So this is a very simple way. If you're sketching on the field or in your office, you can just divide, if it's the Doric order, you can divide the height of the entablature by thirds. So our next step is to continue the opening of the window further up to where it meets the actual cornice. Okay, so let's take a look at, we're just going to project the corners. Each one of these corners, you're going to roughly draw a 45-degree angle from the point, of course, to the top of the cornice. Again, this is simply a construction line. I actually don't build classical cornices as a literal 45-degree angle. Okay, I'm just going to pause that for a minute and let you kind of construct that from based on the information I just explained. Okay, so let's put a little bit more detail. Hopefully your drawing is relatively precise. Let's draw a profile for what the actual cornice looks like in this particular order. So I'm just going to take the third section and divide that in half. You know, again, I'm just freehanding this. If we were to manually draw this and type this down on a drawing board with triangles, it would probably take more than 2 hours to actually draw this. But for the most part, let's take a look at this section here. And I'll just kind of draw on a separate sheet of more careful detail. Okay, so we have large detail of the cornice. You know, we did 2 diameters and divide them into thirds. 1/3. So the architrave is here, the frieze is here. Let's take a look at the diagonal line that we just established. And I know your drawing is much smaller than mine, but so let's divide this part in half. So let's draw a cyma recta on this corner. Again, from our last lecture, the cyma recta is 2 curves, the convex and of course the concave, depending how you're looking at this. Then let's just quickly freehand the cyma recta. Then of course, normally in the Doric order, these are small little brackets underneath. So we'll just draw a square. Then of course we can freehand the little brackets underneath. Now remember, the cyma recta is the profile where the belly is at the bottom. The cyma reversa is where the belly is actually at the top. This is normally drawn for a bed mold between the cornice and of course the frieze. You know, our sketch is only roughly an 8.5 by 11 sheet. We're just going to quickly kind of sketch in just to give the drawing more finesse, the proper cyma recta. Okay, so let's go back to this detail. So in other words, you're just going to be drawing a flat block. This is a larger detail of this section here. Then to add more detail onto the sketch, you can simply just freehand just some small little brackets. Okay, so our next section is to draw the arch with its proper nomenclature and graphic sensibilities. So again, at the top of the cornice, the center will, of course, will become the radius point. You can use your compass or a circle template. You can freehand this. I like to freehand work because I'm mostly drawing by freehand, but of course, you'll continue the edge of the column and of course the edge of the entablature up. Now remember, in classical architecture, for the most part, the columns the neck of the column is 99% always aligned with the edge of course, the frieze. The architrave somewhat projects out. The cornice is drawn like this. So remember, when you're sketching this in the field, or any sort of, if you're hardling this, to always remember that the edge of the frieze and the entablature is really aligned with the neck of the column. So given that rule, is that you would continue the edge of the columns up to where it meets the top of the cornice. Of course, this will become the radius for the arch. If you don't have a compass, you can use your little cheat sheet and draw the curve from each one of the, just from the radius, just as a freehanded exercise. Of course, you can use your scale and measure it. Then you'll just, of course, go back in and just connect the dots with the curve. So the inside of the arch, of course, is called the intrados. The outside of the arch, of course, is called the extrados. So again, we're just going to project up the width of the pilaster of the column. Then obviously you can measure this. So it looks like roughly about 1 3/8. 1 3/8. And then I like to draw 45s. 1 3/8. Okay. So there, you'll just connect the curves. Okay, so at this point, you should have drawn the entire Palladian arch. I'm just going to pause that for a few minutes and let you get caught up. Okay, so we have about 15 more minutes. I can give you some time to kind of finish the drawing up. Then later you can start drawing the keystone, the center part of the arch, which of course goes back to the radius. You can project this up. Then to finish the base off, I just draw, you can just kind of arbitrarily determine the thickness of the windowsill, just to give the window frame a base. Again, we have about 15 minutes before we go on our break. Does anyone have any questions, or if you're totally lost, that's fine. Okay, I'll just write some terms. Of course, I'm familiar with the keystone. The extra dose. The outside curve. The intradose is the inside curve. And of course, depending on the architecture, the architect, the voussoirs are the diagonal members that make the structure of the arch. So these are called voussoirs. Of course, the diagonal members. Then I just like to kind of to finish the drawing, just to do kind of a square cap for the top of the plasters. Okay, since no one has any questions, that means they're working or they know exactly what to do, which is good. Okay, so when we come back from our lunchtime break, let's make sure that we have the plan drawn underneath the facade, roughly about 1.5 or 2 inches. The shadow's not going to be that complicated on this one as some of the ones we did before. Okay, so I think in about 5 minutes, we'll take about a 10-minute break, and that way you can get up to speed in getting the drawing finished. And Valerie, were there questions in the chat room, or are you still there?
I'm here. No questions in chat.
Okay, good. That means everything I did was completely clear and totally understandable.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay, so before we go on our break in 5 minutes, let's kind of take a break from that. I'll give you some time to get your drawing finished. You know, as a serious designer or architect in any sort of design, graphic design capacity, if you're really serious about understanding the proportion of things, you know, we could probably take it upon yourself. I like to do overlays. You know, we have one golden section established as the outline of course, the window itself. But again, if you wanted to figure out if the mullion space or the windows are actually golden section proportion ratios themselves, then of course, if you draw a diagonal line 90 degrees to, of course, the diagonal from the golden section, then of course you can figure out if these different mullions are actually golden section ratios without having to go back and draw the square, take the compass, the midpoint, do all that stuff. You can figure out, you know, it looks like just when I freehanded this, that some of the subdivisions and the mullions probably are golden sections. You know, what is the ratio of the large window? You could, you know, analyze that and see if, you know, this entire bay is, what proportion is that? Is this one? It looks like it's 3, could be 3 squares. Maybe it's a golden section and a half. You know, maybe this section in itself is, then you can of course take your adjustable triangle and figure out if the entire entablature is the golden section itself, just by using the regulating line, of course, naively disguised as, of course, the diagonal. Be interesting to take this drawing, do a nice hardline version, and then figure out, you can probably discover some of the hidden geometric principles that I didn't really describe. But that's the beauty of, you know, properly proportioning something. You find other ratios and discoveries that you didn't really, or any architect really didn't intend. Okay, well, it is 1 o'clock. Valerie, let's just kind of take a 10-minute break, and I'm going to start showing them how to do shades and shadows in kind of a different sort of language than we did the first class last week. So why don't we take about a 10-minute break? Valerie, does that work for you? Okay, let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 1:10 or 1:15, and then we'll start properly drawing shades and shadows on this beautiful plating arch that you've spent an hour drawing. I think I might have been muted. I just was going to have the class take about a 10-minute break to get the line drawing up to par, and then we'll talk about shades and shadows in about 10 minutes. So we'll take a 10-minute break. And Valerie, does that work with you? Okay, does anyone have any questions about anything so far? Okay, so let's kind of take a look at how could you take this drawing further. So we have about 45 minutes or an hour. You know, early we did shadows in plan, and to do this, you can either do one or two things. You can establish the solar angle as 30, 60, or 45. Let's stick with 30, 60 just for clarity purposes. Okay, so the reason I wanted you to use different colors is so you can articulate the shadows just for clarity purposes. And also the colors give your work a little more atmosphere. You can either use the red, either the Derwent or the Prismacolors. I just like to use red just because the red looks more striking. It would make more sense to draw the shadows with, of course, blue because the shadows are the absence of light, so of course they're colder than part and shade. But let's just kind of draw some red shadows. I just kind of like to show red Prismacolor for the shadows. You know, so I just kind of loosely drew a 60-degree angle. So then, of course, you first draw those in plan, and then you project up. Okay, so let's kind of look at some details for a minute. So in other words, the parts that are in front are lighter than, of course, the parts that are in back. So in other words, the double hung windows, the bottom sash is recessed from the front plane, which means the shadows will be, you know, deeper in the bottom sash than they will in the top sash. So the ones above this will roughly be a little bit more like this. Now again, the solar angle at the facade will roughly be 45 degrees. So for each corner, we're just going to be drawing the 45-degree angle on each one of these corners. So here's the pilaster's edge. Okay, so let's see how far back the shadow will come from the pilaster on the front. In other words, I'll just project this part up. Okay, so let me just, before we do this, let me just show you some basic relationships that we looked at earlier. So in other words, let's just say if this is the front part of either a cornice or a plaster, in other words, you're going to be drawing lightly 45-degree angles in each corner. Then, of course, in plan, you're going to be casting the shadows on the back plane to figure out how actually long they are. So then it's pretty easy just to connect the corners. Then with any sort of color pencil, you're going to be going back and then filling in just the shadow. So in other words, the sun pretty much draws every sort of contour from the front onto the back like that. Okay, since the bottom sash of the double hung window is much further from the picture plane or our eye level, is that of course the shadow will be much deeper. Then I would just go back and lightly draw some 45-degree angles that will give you the end of the shadow. So the same thing with this is that we'll just, and again, this is just a sketch. We'll go back and draw the 45-degree angles on pretty much every corner. So again, you'll just kind of project those up from plan. Since the upper level of the window sash is closer to us, then of course the shadow won't be quite so deep. Okay, so let's take a look at how the shadow would fall on the cornice. So here's the curve. I'm just going to kind of just eyeball the cornice just for detail purposes, and then okay, so what you have to do is the sun will transcribe this edge onto the black plane 45 degrees to the lower left. So then, of course, in plan, you're just going to figure out where the shadow falls. What I was saying earlier is that every corner will have a roughly 45-degree angle on it. And then, of course, the sun will transcribe all these profiles from the front of the object onto the back plane behind that. So then you're just going to figure out the shadow and plan onto the back plane like this. Pretty much you'll just connect all those corners. So this shadow will be the same profile as the front. Then you'll just go back in and shade in all of that as the shadow. The same thing with the curve. You can just take your circle template or your radius and your compass and project the the curve down. That'll become the spring line from here. It's transposed onto here. Then, of course, the radius will be transposed onto here. You'll take the radius or the compass or the circle template and put the radius here. So in other words, you're going to be drawing this, and you'll be shading in all of this. It looks very complex, but it's a very simple magic. So then all I'm doing is I'm just simply taking each one of these corners, that. Then we'll just go back in and fill in the shadows onto the window like that. Okay, so again, I'm just doing the same thing that I just did earlier with this and with this one. The edges are transcribed from the corners back onto the back plane. So on and so forth. Then, of course, if the windowsill projects in the front and plan, is that to figure out how far the shadow falls on the back wall, go back to the plan, project back. So in other words, this will be the entire shadow. Okay, so the next part is how would you figure out, how far does the shadow from the cornice go on to either the frieze or the architrave? Of course, the shadow from the cornice will roughly fall onto parts of course, the frieze like this. So the frieze will be lightly shaded because that is a part that will be in shade, and of course the shadow will be underneath it. But how do you actually properly draw that? So I'm just going to move the paper around and then okay, so let's just kind of draw a section through the entablature or the cornice. Of course, the plane here, this is the edge of the column. Here, the front of the column, and then let's draw the cyma recta. Let's draw the box. The brackets are here. So a 45-degree angle would roughly be here, which means if you were to project this on the front, like if this were the cross section through the actual cornice, then of course the sun will cast a shadow from this corner onto the back of what's called the frieze. So you can see how far the shadow falls on the frieze. You just sort of project that up. So in other words, probably it looks like if you were to draw on the front, is that this would probably fall roughly a little bit underneath the bottom of course, the cornice. Then to show shadows on the mullions, I just would kind of lightly show a shadow on the left side of the line. Then to establish a little more depth, I would maybe go back in and just put some light shading on the windows, the glass itself, because they are recessed from the front. Then I would spend some time, we have about 30 minutes or so, to go back and put value in the background. Just to make the front of this plane, the plasters, and of course the archway as the foremost reading, of course, pulled away from the picture plane. Now, depending on what color you're using, if you're using Prismacolor or Derwent's, Carmine Red or Poppy Red is a good red. It's not too much pink in it. But if you start shading lightly with red, it starts looking pink. So what I would do is mix like a yellow ochre or something to make sure the drawing isn't really pink. It's more kind of like a red orange, so it's not pink. Then I'll just take some, this is like a yellow ochre light just in the background, just to make sure that the rendering is not actually pink. You know, so this way the drawing is kind of like a nice warm red, not like a Mary Kay pink. um, Okay, so I'm just going to take a section through this, the side light. How would we draw that? How the shadows work? I'm just going to freehand the section profile, the Sima recta. So again, here is the here's the double windows frame mullion section. This. So then obviously to draw the shadows on that, here is the jam that is seen beyond. Here's our 45-degree angle from the cornice onto the frieze. If you start drawing sections to each one of these, you're going to see that how far the shadows actually fall on certain elements. I find these sort of descriptive preliminary drawings a little more exciting than the actual subject, just by their simplicity and descriptiveness. Okay, well, it's 1:40. Does anybody have any questions about anything so far? We'll have to check with Valerie to see if you guys have any questions in the chat room. I'm not able to open the chat room when I have two different screens open.
No, no questions in chat. We're
Oh.
all good.
Oh, good. So I think to finish this drawing, you can start establishing some value for the background. Then to make sure that, of course, the pilasters and the arch and, of course, the voussoirs are free of value to make sure that these project, because you can see in plan that the wall is relatively thick and these project forward in the elevation just by virtue of the shading. Okay, well, we have about 20 more minutes. I'll let you finish your drawing. And then I'd kind of like to see what the other students come up with in the class. I think there's 4 or 5 students online today.
We lost a few friends after our little break. I think it's hard sometimes getting that much time off of work, but we do have Hill and Joshua. If they wanted to share either of those, you guys can drop it in the chat or whatever works best.
Great.
Or just turn on your camera and show us.
Yeah, sure. You know, it's really fascinating that, you know, a few simple moves can take a line drawing and make it look so three-dimensional without having to draw a perspective drawing of it. Okay, so we have about 15 more minutes. I was just gonna review some learning outcomes. So we figured out how to draw the Serlian or the Palladian arch. Originally created by Sebastian Serlio, that predates Palladio, the Renaissance architect. But we learned how to construct this using the golden section, which of course is the square subdivided by the midpoint, and of course the radius determines this end. So of course the frame of the opening is of course the golden section rectangle. So then we learned, what the introdos, how to draw the introdos, aligned with the neck of the column, and of course the entablature, particularly the face of the frieze. Then we learned how to draw the extrados, continue the pilaster up, and then of course becomes the outside of the arch. Then of course we learned how to calculate the proper height of the entablature based on the Doric column ratio, which is 8 diameters tall. So in other words, 8 of the diameters becomes the dimension for, in other words, so the entablature height is 2 of the diameters. And then we properly learned how to calculate the shade and shadows from the plan, and then of course projecting up into the elevation. Obviously if this was an ionic column capital, we'd be using 9 diameters. You would be drawing the volutes. But since this is 8, you can see in the chart that that is the Doric order. 9 is ionic, and of course 10 is a Corinthian order. It looks like most people have checked out for summer vacation. I still would like to at least see some of the drawings from the few students that are still in the class. If you want to, you can email me. Valerie, can you type in my email address?
So we have one that's in the chat.
Okay, I wish I can't, I'm not sure how to see it on my end. Let me see if I can do that.
So at the bottom of the screen, there's the security and like chat and all that stuff. You'll just click that.
I'm trying to figure out how to do that. Let's see. I wonder if he could just email it, because email it to me. I really can't open that screen like I used to.
I just downloaded it. Let me forward it on to you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I still can't. Oh, I still can't enlarge the screen to see anything. Did you email it to me or?
Yes, I emailed it.
Oh, great. Okay, yeah, let me. Oh, okay, yeah, that looks nice. All right. Good. Okay, well, actually, my verbosity makes sense when I look at some of these drawings. Okay, good. And then I wonder if Joshua Brinson had shared an image. If not, I mean, that's fine too. Well, we have about 5 more minutes. Any questions about anything of the drawing or? Yeah, I think this is about. Is this Mr. Swift's elevation?
Joshua.
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Joshua. I think Joshua. I would make the mullions a little bit darker so that way, because there are shadows. Let me kind of sketch this for you. I didn't go over this, but to draw the mullions for the windows, you pretty much have this. In other words, I think the shadows are going to be falling on the left. I would probably try to draw. Let me do kind of a better version of that, but I think that. Is that I would draw a shadow because the mullions do have thickness to them. I just like to show kind of a diagonal for the shadow like this, and then that. Because the glass actually recessed in from the frame. So then kind of like that. Just to kind of make the mullions have a certain thickness because they just look like lines on the elevation, but you can improve that. You know, then if you look at this, you're going to have another shadow from the extra dose onto the back plane. So in other words, it would have something like this. Okay, well, I think we have about 5 more minutes. I guess if we don't have any other questions, we can break. And so I think, Valerie, this is recorded so other people can watch and draw.
It is. Yeah, we've got it. And the other one, we've already had several people watch. So
Oh, good. Okay.
I think it's good because then they can watch it, pause it, continue on like that. So, yeah.
Well, great. Well, good. Okay, so our next lecture will start our perspective drawing. So this would be really interesting work. We're going to be drawing 3 dimensions, of course, on a 2-dimensional plane. I think some of the students have already drawn some of these. We're going to be doing something a little bit more sophisticated than we did the last couple of months. So I'm looking forward to seeing everyone next Tuesday afternoon at 12 then.
Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Valerie.